Thank you.
Thank you, Eleanor. Well, good evening, actually. 7 o'clock in Crete, and I'm here all alone at the Foundation for Research and Technology, HELLAS. So they've let me stay behind and use one of their conference rooms. So I'm very grateful to them. This presentation is going to look at a few bits and pieces. It's very hard to know how to pitch some of these presentations. I do quite a lot of them, and they're for very different types of audience and different technical levels. So I hope I've got this one correct. But in order to understand some of the stuff that we're doing, that there are some foundational things that I need to go through. So this is a bit of a mixture, I guess, of a lot of the slides that I've given over the last 6 months, and I've just put them together. I want to say something about ResearchSpace, which is funded by the Andrew Mellon Foundation. It's creating a collaborative research environment based on semantic technologies, which in some respects are sort of different from linked data, although we make use of linked data. Although I can't confess that we have in the pure form of the word linked data, because we haven't actually linked out to anybody as yet. But we link through semantic for a semantic framework, the CDOC CRM, rather than hard coding in links to other data sets, and this will become clear as I go through the presentation. So part of the value of what we're doing is integrating different cultural heritage data sets, and as we go forward, this will include archives and libraries as well as museum and gallery data. So we need something that can integrate but keep the integrity, the meaning and the context of that data, despite the fact that we're trying to bring it together into a common view. So the method of data integration is one that isn't used, it hasn't been used in the past. Normally there are unifying databases, there are unifying models that people fit their data into, and that's how aggregation takes place. So that's something that, for example, happens with the Europeana aggregation as a big one, but also in many other unified projects. So there's usually a core model at the center of these things, and people approximate their data to them. But that means that a lot of the perspective and context of the data is lost in that translation. We use a different way of harmonizing data, which doesn't lose any of that meaning. And that's why it's extremely valuable for research purposes, because research is based on the premise that you understand and have a context for the data that you're analyzing and building onto. Research is about building knowledge, but if you don't have the foundation, if you don't have the clarity and meaning of the original data coming in, then it's extremely difficult to do that. We want to be able to reason, we want to be able to use computer reasoning over these data sets. We want to be able to put in rules that apply across those data sets despite the fact that they're different. This is a more complicated aspect of what we're doing with ResearchSpace. We're already using it in some ways to make the environment non-technical. So all of the stuff that I've just talked about has to happen, but it has to happen for non-technical users. In the museum sector, we have a lot of curators who are not used to digital tools or have very little technical skills. And out in the linked data world, many of the tools that you'll find are extremely technical. And we need to leverage this away from the programmers and the technical people and make it useful for the non-technical users and our humanities base. So that's sort of a summary. So research in context, this is some of the background to what we're doing. So we have a collections management system called Merlin. It's based on standards. It's based on the Spectrum standards, but it's been highly customized over the last 20 years according to our own requirements. It was based on a system, like most collection management systems, on an internal model. It was never designed to be an open world model. It was never designed for the public. It was designed internally to create a catalogue and inventory, and we call these type of applications closed world. But what actually happens in our database, and some of it is captured in our internal user interface, is that there's a lot of implicit meaning. And this implicit meaning is quite important. So we're able to use the database extremely well within the walls of the museum. Our curators are able to use it because they understand what this implicit meaning is. But when you start extracting the data and putting it out onto the World Wide Web, this implicit meaning is not transferred with it. Our UIs aren't transferred with it, and our curators' knowledge isn't transferred with it. So what we actually create is a lot of data that has lost its implicit meaning, has lost its context, and therefore is very difficult to be used in a research context, and I would argue also in a sensible engagement context as well. So when we take the data out of our collections management system and we put it onto our collections online system, which is pretty good, it reflects the fact that we have a closed world collection system, and therefore our collections online system also doesn't represent the meaning and context that we have internally. And for many users, who don't understand museum data, the meaning and context is completely hidden. And it becomes a very narrow reference resource. And I'll talk a little bit about that because there's been some surveys done on the museum's collections online. We've done one recently ourselves, but also there was one that was featured, I think, at one of the Museum and Web conferences, so I'll talk about that in a second. But the other thing about museum data and many internal catalogue systems is that the people who are using it actually have interests that are far wider than simple inventory information. So what we're doing is not just about putting context and injecting meaning and context into data, but it's also thinking about flexibility in order to start expanding the type of information that we record about our collection, because a lot of the internal information, like measurements and other properties of the object, are actually not of interest to much of our audience. What is of interest is, why is our collection significant? Why is it relevant? What's its place in history? And these are things that we don't tend to record in inventory systems, and we need a system that transitions into something that is more suitable for open audiences. Two slides here. One is called research and context, and one is called engagement and context, and they're exactly the same. I could say exactly the same thing about our engagement. So our system is closed world, it doesn't have implicit meaning. This means it makes it less interesting for our general audiences. It means that we can't readily give relationships in the data, just in terms of our own data. People just search for objects, find an object, and that's the end of their search, and they start again. And this isn't very good for engagement. So all the same sort of things I said about research in context, I think readily apply to engagement as well. I'll put a little note to myself at the bottom about SF MoMA. So I'm just going to transfer over to another site. So this is the sort of thing I mean about context and technologists. So this is a blog from someone from San Francisco, and they're talking about an API. So a lot of museums now create APIs of their data, and this is how it's demystified to a general audience. We can begin to understand an API's constituents, data methods, arguments, in the modular building blocks of a language. Nouns, verbs, and adjectives. The nouns are the pieces of data. And this is the bit that I think we need to get over. If we treat our data as simply flat lists of nouns, then it is terribly uninteresting. And it's unfortunate that this analogy is being used. The verbs are the methods, the programming methods, and the adjectives are some of the functions that you have within that. But actually what we need to start thinking about is some of the context, and getting away from simply creating flat lists of naming words and universals, and start thinking about how these things relate, what's their context to the real world. Going back to this, we need to start thinking in a more open world, not in a closed world way. And unfortunately, there's not a lot I can do about this in its entirety. But I think the entire cultural heritage sector needs to start thinking about this. And in fact, the Standards Committee at the Collections Trust in the UK, who run Spectrum, are now thinking about changing Spectrum to reflect this as well. So that there's movements around changing what were traditional standards into standards that are fit for purpose for open world use. So what we do with our system and with ResearchSpace is that we start looking not at technology and APIs, but start looking at knowledge representation and understanding. How can we make sure that people who don't know our collection, who don't understand the data, and this could be researchers and academics who are not in the museum world, how do they understand, how can they get the clarity of meaning from our information? This is about knowledge representation. This is about properly representing a knowledge to the external world using context. And I've got a quote here from Bertrand Russell saying, particulars of properties of universals are incomplete and insubstantial. They demand a context before anything can be done with them. So the context in this presentation means it's context with the real world. But not only that, it's context in the midst of other data and information. So we don't see any one piece of information standing by itself. Our collection is our collection areas, there's sections within our collections database, give each other area context, and they're all important together. They're not individual commodities. They work as a whole. I won't go into the pictures on this. This is making a point about the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and Deep Thought giving an answer to the question of life, the universe, and everything, and coming back with the answer 42, and then deciding that actually they needed to have a real-world computer to make sense of the question in the first place. Well, I'll move on. Knowledge representation, not technology representation. Let's get away from these APIs that strip out all the meaning, and let's start thinking about how we use the web for knowledge representation. So I said that there was a survey of our collections online system. The reason that I'm putting these slides in is because I think that maybe we need some practical examples. So I will focus on our search system. So I'll make a comparison with what we're doing on ResearchSpace with our current collections online system. This is a survey, and it was done by UCL in London. And there's a graphic here that says, yes, I found what I was looking for. But actually, if you look at the survey, you realise that most of the people who use it know what they were looking for in the first place. So they have a specific thing that they're looking for. They're not exploring the data at all. And the quote here says the majority are seeking a known object and utilise discipline-specific search terms. These are people who understand the data in the first place, not people who don't understand the data and are coming to it without that knowledge of terminology and structure. And if you go to another quote, also suggests that academic browsing in a museum environment is somewhat problematic, as users have to be fairly linear in their search strategies, with little satisfaction when searching broadly or browsing. And I think this is a big problem, not just for researchers, but if you think about that, it's a big problem for engagement. So research and catalogue information. I said before that some of the information is uninteresting to researchers. So what we're trying to do in ResearchSpace, we can't make it more interesting in itself, but what we can do is clarify the meaning and the context of the data that's already there and allow people then to have a stable foundation for layering more information on top of it. So it's more a sort of foundational and infrastructure thing that we're doing. But we can make it a little bit more interesting with data integration, and I'll talk about that in a little while. So the technology in UI doesn't necessarily make it more interesting, but who can make it more interesting? The people using it. But they can only make it more interesting if it's in a form that's helpful to them in the work that they do. So researchers can make this stuff more interesting. They can layer more information on top of it. But there are a number of articles out which talk about linked data not being good for scientific research, not being good for research, because it lacks context and it lacks some of the other aspects of research, attribution, provenance, all those, being able to repurpose it, all that sort of thing is missing from a lot of human readable collections online systems. So if we can put it in a form that researchers can utilize in their projects, then we can get back data from them which is about significance and relevance, because we don't necessarily have the resources to do another 30 years of digitization for different types of fields and different types of information. So we've got to make use of the people who use the data, but we've got to put it in a form that they can actually use and send back to us. Again, I've got another slide which has exactly the same, I think, not interesting to a lot of our audiences as well. We can make it more interesting through research, but also audiences themselves can make it more interesting. The fact of the matter is that curators within the British Museum are asked questions all the time about the collection. And what happens is we send back answers by email or through other means, but we don't put it back in our collections management system. We don't put it back in our collections management system because we have no room within the standards that we're using to input that type of information that people are interested in. So again, part of what we're doing with the new models of representing data, which are more flexible, is allowing our curators to actually put that data back into the system and answer the questions through an online system. And in that, we can build up knowledge about significance and relevance based on something that we already do, but we are not capturing properly. The significance and relevance of the collection is something that we need to think about. But where we can make the data more interesting, though, is integrating it with other museums and galleries and libraries, because other museums and galleries have different perspectives on the data, which can make the experience more interesting. So there's a quote here from Nick Crofts, who is current chair of CDOC. There's a need for increased cooperation and integration, combining heterogeneous information results in richer levels of content and understanding then are possible from isolated resources. So this is a major part of what we're doing. How can we integrate across these different data sets, bring in new perspectives about the same sorts of things, whether they be local perspectives or national ones or international ones, and particularly local ones, because in local ones you have more personal perspectives on the data, which is of interest both to researchers and to people wanting to engage with the collection. And semantic data allows us to do this, and the CDOC CRM that we're using here at Forth allows us to capture these perspectives and represent them without squeezing them into a commoditized box. And this is an example. This is a simple example. I have a number of museology books at home. This is a pretty good one. Eileen Huber-Greenhill, who has been writing in this area for a very, very, very long time. I did talk to one of our directors who's since retired, and Eileen was always talking to us about what we weren't doing with our data, and we were always ignoring her. But these things are stuck in her books from 1992. Just a single object, a silver teaspoon, is described completely differently in different museums, depending on their location. Depending whether it's a national museum, depending whether it's a museum that understands some of the context, some of the information around the production of those objects, who are closer to its production, have a completely different vocabulary for describing them, and these things are important. And these things are the things that we capture and are able to integrate and provide a platform where local museums can sit beside national museums and not be swamped by the extent of the data. I can't hear anything on your side. Is it okay? Can everybody hear?
Yeah.
Hello.
We've muted everyone else, so that's the
right. Okay.
polite silence.
I'm just worried. I don't want to be talking to myself. So just checking anyway.
Tell them people might write in questions.
People could write in questions in the little chat box.
Okay, that's fine. I just wanted to check anyway, because sometimes these lines go down and you can spend your time talking to yourself for ages.
Exactly.
Anyway, let's move on. So this is something that Eleanor has seen before. I've just condensed it down, and it sort of illustrates the reason why we need to integrate data and why we need to rely a little bit more on our local and regional museums, because the British Museum may have a big collection, but actually it's a fraction of what we own as a nation, and being able to bring these things together is quite important. This is just illustrating the fact that when I now go to a collections online system, I never search for an object. I always search for something else, like a place. And I pretend that I'm a new user, and I think, well, where do I start? So I start with my hometown, which is Lowestoft, which is off the east coast of Suffolk, and I see what comes up. And in the British Museum, there's a few bits and pieces, stuff around Lowestoft porcelain. Lowestoft porcelain was quite important. It's 18th century. It was also replicated in some other processes as well, but genuine Lowestoft porcelain is a valued item, and it is in many different museums around the world. But also we have prints and drawings. We have the National Collection of Prints and Drawings in the UK, and you'll see drawings and paintings and prints of the coast around Lowestoft. So this is Lowestoft, Suffolk, Pishes, Vuse. This is a print made after Turner. So if we go to the Tate, it's interesting that you see a painting there called the Lowestoft Bowl. This is a painting of Lowestoft porcelain, but later, and done in the Dutch style. In the Rijksmuseum, you have paintings and drawings of the Battle of Lowestoft. Again, I think in the 17th century, these were massive battles. Many ships, 200 or so ships battling it out off the coast of Lowestoft. There's the National Railway Museum here, where the Victorian steam trains came in to bring the Victorian tourists into Lowestoft. Lowestoft was a spa town. In the Metropolitan in New York, you'll see there's a trifle from Lowestoft. There's Lowestoft porcelain sitting in the Metropolitan as well. There's quite a bit of it. And there are paintings as well of people from Lowestoft. Lowestoft is in a county called Suffolk. There are many wealthy landowners in Suffolk who moved to the States. And you see lots of connections when you go around American art galleries to Suffolk, as well as Lowestoft. Maritime Museum, there's a commemorative medal from the Battle of Lowestoft in 1665, and there's also some stuff around the maritime history of Lowestoft, and so on and so forth. So different museums view Lowestoft in slightly different ways depending on the collection, the objects they have, and how they record them. If we go further, the National Museum of Scotland, they have some model boats. Lowestoft's been a famous fishing village or town since the Middle Ages, and they have some boats, some model boats, and one of them is the Star of Scotland. And the model was made in Great Yarmouth, but actually has links to Lowestoft. So this is the boat from an archive. This is a small archive off the east coast of England, showing the Star of Scotland in Scotland, moored up. This is the Aberdeen Regional Museum, so this is a local authority museum. It has a full schematic of the boat and its history. It tells you that actually at some point it was sold to the fleet in Lowestoft and renamed the Jamaica. And the reasons why it was renamed the Jamaica are quite interesting as well, given Suffolk's history in terms of landowning in the Caribbean, but all of the boats in Lowestoft were named after Caribbean places. So there's an interesting historical link and relationship to a lot of other things there. Paintings of it, you can go to lots of little museums up the coast of England and Scotland and see these sorts of things. There's the boat in a photograph from an archive in Lowestoft Bay. It's been renamed to the Jamaica. It's an LT boat now, so it's changed. Incidentally, my dad was an engineer on the fleet in Lowestoft, and he fixed that boat. So I found all these connections, and found when I rang him up and talked to him about it, they actually knew that boat and worked on it. So this is where some of the personal experiences come in to looking at these different perspectives, which are really interesting from an engagement point of view. But all these things are separate. You'd never be able to make these relationships and links without doing a huge amount of work. So what are we trying to do is find the relationships that bind these things together, that allow us to harmonize archives and libraries and small museums and big museums and galleries to enable us to do this quite easily. A muirhead bone, this is in the National Gallery in Washington. This is autumn in Lowestoft. So there's muirhead bones of Lowestoft as well. This is a pub in Lowestoft. This isn't in any museum. It's called the Joseph Conrad, and lots of people in Lowestoft wondered why a pub chain had opened and named their pub the Joseph Conrad. Well, if you delve further into other archives, you find out that Joseph Conrad, when he came from Poland, landed in Lowestoft, and that's where he learned English. So there's a very interesting narrative around Lowestoft and Joseph Conrad and muirhead bone, as we find out actually learning English in Lowestoft and travelling with the fishing people up the coast of Scotland. This is how he learnt to sail boats and work with these sorts of people. This is another archive picture. This is a person from Shetland whose work took her all the way down the coast of the UK to Lowestoft. She's collecting fish oil in Lowestoft. Find that actually the muirhead bone in the British Museum of Joseph Conrad, because of course this is how they met. Not only did he learn English in Lowestoft, but it's the trips that he took out from Lowestoft to Scotland which resulted in him meeting muirhead bone. Here's a muirhead bone of the round reading room of the British Museum. It's in the Tate, but there's no mention in the Tate's collections online of any of the connections with the British Museum, and here is the problem. That's sort of a summary of some of the reasons why we're doing it. I wanted to say also that one of the reasons that I'm at Forth at the moment is that we're working on something that is a little bit larger than the ResearchSpace. It's looking at the sustainability model for ResearchSpace and other systems that want to provide these type of services, whether research or engagement, because we've realised that there is a big problem in terms of sustainability. So I'm here at the moment discussing tools and looking at specifications, not for ResearchSpace, but for a project called Culture Brokers, which is looking at trying to work out what are the sustainable data provisioning processes that need to occur if we are going to aggregate data, and that will have to happen, I guess, until there's an infrastructure in all museums able to produce linked data. Although the ideal position would be if everybody could produce their own linked data, and address some of the lack of functionality in some of the European models and practices, that would include aggregations like Europeana, which are using core unified models. And we need to make sure that the necessary knowledge, the knowledge of the institutions, is being inputted into this. So we need providers to be a much bigger part of the aggregation process, not simply just throwing their data at aggregators and saying goodbye. In order for these things to be sustainable, there needs to be benefits for providers coming out of them. It's the same sort of situation where programmers say, well, a test of a good API is whether you use it yourself. Well, the test of an aggregation is whether the providers use it themselves and can replace some of their infrastructure with the infrastructure being provided by the aggregator. And that's simply not happening, and that's failing. So we need to create real tangible benefits. We need to make use of this data, not just for engagement and reuse from researchers, but actually to bring back into our organizations to help us enrich our own information, and to actually reduce some of our costs as well, and help us with some of the documentation stuff that we need to do. Other data sets can help us do that, but they need to be integrated in the right way. So we may need to make all of this very cost effective. And in the end, we need to make a transition from to a full distributed model rather than centralized aggregators. There'll always be a need for centralized aggregators in a sense, because of some of the work that people do requires it to be brought together into a central store. But it's much more cost effective when people are actually publishing their own linked data and we're just simply harvesting it. So that's some of the principles, I guess, behind what we're doing. So I just wanted to talk about something a bit more practical and how this relates, for example, to a search function. In ResearchSpace, we have in our working prototype, we're now making this production at the moment, have a number of different tools for annotation and collaboration and data baskets and all that sort of stuff. But one of the main things that we will be working on first is our search system, and we'll be making the production version of this available as a download, so anybody can use it with their CDOC CRM data, and hopefully that will happen at the end of spring. The problem with search is that a lot of it is keyword searching. So what you have with stuff like Google is, although it feels very reassuring because you get huge amounts of hits, there's very low precision. So as you go beyond the first page, obviously it's ranked. You start going into reams and reams of pages, and you're not exactly sure whether you've got the results you want or not. So there's huge amounts of recall and low to medium precision. But we seem to be very happy with low precision because it's very responsive. In structured data, when we start using structured data, we get richer searching, but we have problems for recall. So we get a lot of precision, but research isn't necessarily about precision in the first instance. It's about browsing data and being able to home in on something. And we don't always trust the data sources as well. So sometimes we want to browse at a higher level before we go down to a more detailed level. If we're researching wine glasses, we may search for glasses first because we don't trust that the right documentation has been done. We want to make our own decision about whether these glasses are wine glasses or not. But the majority of people still use keyword search, and in fact, our curators say that in our collections online and our internal collections management system, they use keyword searching. And it's not a problem for them internally because it's one data set and it's not merged with lots of others. But as we expand the amount of data that we put into these systems, keyword searching will become more problematic for them. And it's not intuitive, and we need to produce new search interfaces which are more intuitive, which balance out precision and recall, and not too complicated, and don't need local knowledge to make them work. And this isn't an issue for just cultural heritage. So when I was putting these slides together, I was doing some searching myself and found this thing, this is a document that's done by a marketing company for the legal profession. It says, "Where eagles fear to tread, the problem of keyword search in e-discovery." And it says, I have to move my control panel, hang on a second. "The heavy reliance on keyword search in e-discovery places an enormous burden on today's legal teams. Inconsistencies in language, inefficiencies in search techniques, and software user interfaces which conceal more than they reveal. Conceal more than they reveal. Place the attorney in a difficult position." You know, these legal firms could get sued if they don't get it right, which would be a massive shame. So the legal profession, there's more and more data coming into it. There's variable vocabularies, inadequate search tools, poor balance between recall and precision. All the same problems we have in cultural heritage. So we have, I would say, more sophisticated and more variable data than the legal profession. So these problems are even worse for us. Serious consequences for legal teams, but actually there are very serious issues for researchers as well, which is one of the reasons why there's a poor uptake of some of the linked data that we're producing. Some of the research that people do in, for example, archaeology, could be very skewed by poor data, by poor linking, by poor same-as relationships, poor equivalences. There have been cases where there's been layers and layers of information being put onto something by researchers, and one small information has meant that dating has been out by millions of years, and it's only been discovered later on. So this is another issue for me as a person putting a research environment together, is that I need to make sure that there is clarity and precision in the data that I put in. So this is our current collections online search interface. So you can do the keyword search, which is what most people do, and then you have all of these boxes for the advanced search, and you can put bits and pieces in. You can put a name in or a technique or whatever, but there's no context around that. This is where people would get a certain amount of precision by using our vocabularies. But as I say, surveys show that most people don't use any of this. Most people don't use advanced searches at all, and including our curators. And as I say, the more data we integrate into this, the bigger the problem. In the web world, in stuff like Google's knowledge graph, we have these associative queries. And again, if you put in the Portland vase from the British Museum, you get this little box that comes up. They've got their own little database where they draw data in. They've got Freebase and Wikipedia, etc. And try and disambiguate by trying to capture what you're looking for and giving you a little bit more information and plugging you into their knowledge graph. And if you go to different knowledge graphs, it's not just Google, it's also Bing and others have these knowledge graphs. You get slightly different information because the related information is not really related, it's done by ranking. So you get some strange results. But if you do try and put some context into your search, if I want to search for stuff influenced by Rembrandt, it confuses it completely. It's got no sense of context whatsoever. It's a keyword search. So it has stuff that influenced Rembrandt, so it finds the word influenced by, but it has absolutely no understanding of what that means. And that's not very good for precise searching. Schema.org, I just wanted to put this in because a lot of people have said that they're going to start using it. It is a core model. It has all of the same issues. And it's very generalized, so it's not very appropriate for cultural heritage information. It's better than Dublin Core, but it has some application profiles which many people would think useful, but actually application profiles don't apply to the variable nature of the different data sets that cultural heritage organizations actually publish. And so it can be very unhelpful. It can be helpful for getting for helping with Google searches, but it's not very helpful for doing more in-depth engagement and research. And so we try and avoid these core models. Squeezing our data into these core models is not an option for us. And of course, we already have a load of core models already. I'm sure you've seen this visualization that's done in the States, looking at all the different standards in cultural heritage. We have tons of core standards. And this is why we have them, because every time everybody thinks that a standard doesn't cover what they need in terms of their own requirements and vocabularies, they create another one. We have masses and masses of these standards. And even when you zoom in on it, there's still loads and loads of this stuff. They're already out of date, so we use Spectrum, but it's such a customized version of Spectrum now that it's unrecognizable, because we need to reflect our own disciplines, we need to reflect our own mission, we need to reflect the fact that we've got a history in this area, our own historical past affects the way that we document our own objects, and people need to reflect their local situations as well, their regional perspectives as well. And this is why none of these standards ever stand without being customized at all. We are constantly customizing, and we are very, very variable. And this has been done over many years. Our documentation team would say that our vocabularies, however good or bad they are research objects in their own right. They're historical documentation in their own right, even without their functional purpose in the collections management system. This is CDOC-CRM. This is a standard slide that a lot of us use. I have actually produced a primer for CDOC-CRM, which I would encourage you to download and read. It gives you a lot of the information about how the CDOC-CRM works. There's little technical information. It's more the concepts of the CRM and why we use it and why it came about in the first place. But this is at the top level. We tend to not use vocabularies. Trying to map vocabularies is pointless. So what we try and do is harmonize on relationships. And I do another slide in another presentation which quotes David Behrman, who was also looking at this. In the 1990s, he realized that our fixation on vocabularies meant that we were never going to be able to properly integrate and keep perspectives in data. This is in 1995. And we still haven't been able to do it. CDOC-CRM was created in 1996, 97. And it's had that functionality for a long time, but we need to move mindsets. We need to change from our legacy software to new types of software in order to make use of relationships. The CDOC CRM is the ontology for doing that. It does incorporate vocabularies, they're E55 types, and we do try and co-reference them to a certain extent, mostly to broader terms. It's not worth the time and effort to try and do it precisely. But what we're really concentrating on are persistent things and temporary things. CRM is an event-driven system with relationships. It relates permanent type things, actors, people, concepts, objects, to temporary things, events, and also places them in a time and space. It takes a completely different approach to organizing and representing data, but its approach is about representing it within the real world, within real time and space. And this provides us with an opportunity to generalize so that we can harmonize and integrate without affecting the actual information that is in the data itself. We are simply injecting a framework of semantics into the data, but we're not taking any of the data out. We're not mandating any fields. You can have whatever you want in it. These are generalizations that create a semantic glue, a semantic relationship, which means that we can bring data together in an RDF format, and they work without any hard coding. So we can harmonize data without doing anything else except taking in CDOC CRM data. We can take, you concentrate on your own knowledge representation, you encode it, and once it comes into a system that's aggregating it, that's it. There's some clever things that we can do with the contextual data to do instance matching, so we can use contextual information to see whether people are the same or places are the same. So we don't need to hard code those either. We've already got algorithms that we're working on that use the context around a place, the things that were made in a place, the people that worked in a place, or again, people, the things that people produced, and the things that people associated with when they were. We can use all of this context to say, actually, you're talking about the same person as us, or you're talking about the same place as us. And those tools are already being developed here at Forth. I'm not sure whether this is a useful slide or not, but it's giving you some idea of the sort of relationships. The fact is that when you do a CDOC CRM mapping, you're using a fraction of these. The relationships here cover all sorts of different cultural and heritage situations. So it looks more complicated than it is, but actually when you map your data, it's more readable than it is in an XML format or in a SQL database format. You can actually see the relationships in your data. The reason why we have these ontologies and the reason why they are object-orientated and not flat is because different organizations have different levels of knowledge. So we capture whatever your level of knowledge is in your particular institution, and we put it into this hierarchy of classes so that we can still match it to people who have less knowledge, who have a little bit of information or are not precise. And we can still integrate that data across those different data sets. So regardless of the level of knowledge you've got, we can integrate, and then we can start looking about how we can enrich data sets that have lower levels of knowledge from those that have higher levels of knowledge. So this is a diagram looking at hierarchy of a thing. Right at the top, you know, some sort of physical thing, to a man-made thing, to a physical man-made things. Each of these has slightly different properties, and you fix your mapping into where you have your knowledge, but it's in this hierarchy where it still harmonizes up, it still harmonizes and aggregates across all of these. So you can give your knowledge as much precision as you want, but it doesn't mean it won't integrate with people who have less knowledge and less precision. End up with this. The only reason I show this, by the way, is although it looks complicated, and in fact it's when you look at it, it's not as complicated as any other model. It's actually a simpler model than SQL models. I have a picture of our SQL database model, and it's far more complicated because actually in this model, a lot of the relationships are repeated. There are far fewer relationships, or there are far fewer entities in this than there are in the SQL model. There are far fewer connections, but it's richer. The actual information it gives you is more precise and richer. And the reason why I put the different areas in, so there's biographical data, bibliographical data, production data, dimension data, visual representation, is each of these different areas, because this is a whole collections management system, each of these different areas provides context for the other. And this is why if you take an individual part of this out, so if you take out just the biographical information, it starts to lose its meaning, because its meaning is integrated with the context around it, the subjects, the inscriptions, the materials, etc. And it's much more valuable as a whole than it is in parts. But a lot of projects do tend to take the parts out of these things and lose all that context. So why I'm getting to this is because once you've done your mapping, we go back to the problem of precision and recall. So we get a lot more precision, but we get very little recall. So we've done the difficult job of giving semantics to our data, although I would say it's much less difficult than creating a SQL data model. And we're producing tools here that are going to make it much easier as well. And I know that there are tools in the States that are making this easier. We're getting this down to a fine art, so we can do mappings of data within days now, rather than the time it would take to create a SQL model. We need to be able to allow the recall. What we do then is we use computer reasoning to aggregate some of those paths into more simple ones that people understand. So we are creating search systems that take a lot of those pathways through the data and abstract them into simple relationships that then are part of a search system. So they'll find the data at the right level, they'll give you the right precision and recall, and then you can go down into detail and see what the exact relationships are. So it's satisfying that problem of keyword searching, too much recall, not enough precision, and structured data, too much precision, not enough recall. This is a system that balances that all out and gives you a nice balance between the two. And you can adjust it. You can adjust it for more precision, or you can adjust it for more recall. And we're making this configurable in the search system. But this is the right balance, we think, for the data that we've seen so far. So this is a matrix of domain and range. So a thing is related to another thing by is origin of, or is from, has met, etc. A thing has a relationship with an actor, so a thing has come across an actor, has met it. A thing is from an actor, it refers to an actor, it is referred to by an actor, and so forth and so on. So this is a matrix of relationships that we're putting into a new type of contextual search system. This just makes the point. You can make a lot of different connections across these things and provide quite a innovative and precise type of search system that makes use of all of those different sections of our system, but retains all of the context. This is what will happen in our new search system. We will allow you to choose a domain, like actor, or thing, or event, or place, etc. Do a search with the relationships that are relevant, get a result set, save it, and reuse the results to find something else. So you can start with actors. I want to find people. I don't want to find objects. I want to find people. And then I want to say, I want to use the results of that to find places. And then I want to reuse the results of that to find events. And I want to reuse the results of that to find objects. And maybe I want to reuse the results of the object to go back to people again. So we're using these fundamental categories to allow you to explore the data as well as get results out of it, and to really utilize all the different aspects of your collections management data. So this is some examples. I don't know whether I'll have time. I might be able to just go on to the working prototype. But this gives you an example. So this is an Egyptian search, Thutmose the third. Actually, there's lots of Thutmose in the database. This disambiguates using our authority. As you put it in, it says, right, I'll assume it's created or modified by this person, but actually it allows you then to choose a different context. So actually I didn't mean created or modified by Thutmose, I meant influenced by, or I meant actually I want things about this person, or I want things that came across. So met means they've been in the same space and time as this person, or in the same region, or in the same event, and so forth and so on. You get results up, which are faceted, etc. This is the working prototype, by the way. So we will be building in all of those different types of domain search and allowing you to reuse that on the production version. This just is a proof of concept, I guess. But it's got the museum's 2 million objects in it, and all of the images as well. So we're using that for testing purposes. But the facets as well are nouns, naming words. We're going to replace those as well with relationships. So you can facet with the relationships as well. So this is a completely new way of looking at data and actually getting much better results out of it. And as you go on, I can change this to influenced by, so therefore, if it's influenced by this person, I get a completely different set of results from the last ones. If I start putting in more information, so made of bronze, etc., I can put in a place, Thebes, and when I put that in, again, the same principles apply. We've only got a few relationships in this working prototype. There will be many more in the production version, as I say, related to different domains. But you can see here, what did I mean created in? Or did I mean located in? Or did I mean found out? Or did I mean from? Or did I mean about this place? So different contexts will come up with different results. And these are some screenshots of some of the designs that are now going into development at the moment. So taking Lowestoft, I want to look for people, or I want to look for places, or I want to look for events, or whatever. These are all relationships that you can choose. You can work out what sort of results you want. When you get your results, if you're going to choose a person, for example, you'll get a result of people, not objects, and you'll get a summary of your results. But you can see down the side that the facets are also now relationships, and we're faceting by relationships. Is the creator or has met, is owner of, etc., etc. And we're adding to these relationships as well. And I can save this search and reuse it, as I said, for a different type of search, for a different type of entity. I can use one element of this search as well to start triggering off relationships with other things. So what is related to this person in terms of people, objects, times, place, etc. That's I don't want to go any further than that. I want to give an opportunity to people to ask questions, but I would say that this application will be open source and downloadable from the internet for either within the context of the ResearchSpace platform or separately. So you don't even need to make an investment in ResearchSpace in terms of your time. You can actually just use this search system separately if you want. But although I'd encourage you to use some of the other ResearchSpace tools as well, as and when they come out. We've got a 2-year project, and we're trying to work as fast as possible to produce these things. Thanks.
Dominic, you've injected an enormous amount of valuable information into our heads, so it may take people a minute. Mine's reeling because you took us through logically so many important points. So let's see if people can take a minute to construct some questions back to you. It's opened up now to anyone who wants to ask Dominic a question. Okay, it looks like there's a question from Brian on the chat, Dominic.
Oh, right, sorry, I'll have a look at chat. How do you set up the initial relationship between one domain to another domain using the context when you have large amounts of data? I'm not sure I completely understand. So
No,
the relationships in the data are all done independently of how do you set up the initial relationship between one domain to another?
Yeah, everyone's unmuted too if you want to verbalize.
Oh, yeah. Can you expand on that, Brian? Oh no, you don't have a mic. So we map the data. We have, as I said, more accessible tools for mapping the data. So you map your own data, and this is creating relationships between different entities in your data. And when you put more and more data in, if you integrate it with other people, because they've used the same semantic framework, these things simply allow harmonization. But because you've done it at an individual level, at an institutional level, all of the details are there. But this is the reason we use these fundamental relationships in order to make it easier to find connections across different data sets and different entities. But you can choose the level that you want to do. So an example, maybe I should show an example on screen of something. Hang on a second. I'm sure I've got something that will explain a little bit to how this works. This may be a little bit techy, which I apologize for, but if I can find it. Hang on a sec.
I have one presentation tomorrow and a take home final, but if there's a way that go, it's not
Yeah. Let me just find something. So web literature, that will do. I think I've got some slides in here that might be helpful. If I can. So I did this presentation for at the British Library for a project in Europe called DM2E, Digital Manuscripts to Europeana, and it's talking about how we make these connections. It's got some of the same. We will have these sort of association codes and stuff like that when we come out. This is a piece of CDocCRM. It's part of that diagram I showed you, but actually it's quite easy to look at. I have an object with a URI, which is what the project Alan is doing is providing some of these linked data URIs, and I said that the CRM was event-based, so this object was produced by an event, and the event has a URI, and it's typed as a production, so we know exactly what type of event this is. And in our collection, we have different parts of a production. In other systems, it will be more direct. And we have a CRM relationship called P14 carried out by a person. An object had a production event, and it was carried out by a person. These are generalizations, of course. But, of course, if everybody uses these generalizations, then we can harmonize across them. But, of course, in our world, we have all sorts of vocabularies that describe what carried out by means. And what we do with those is the CRM has a neat way of injecting these roles into this as a clarification rather than interfering with the harmonization process. So we can inject all of this detail into it, but we can still harmonize using P14 carried out by. And this is how all of the CRM works. So there may be all sorts of patterns of these things. Again, here's an acquisition, and it's typed as an acquisition. It's an entity within the CRM as an acquisition. So everybody uses these E numbers to clarify exactly what their entities are, so that we can harmonize. We know that an entity in this data set is the same as an entity in the other data set, and then these relationships work. For example, an acquisition, transfer, title from actually is an abstraction of lots of different association codes like transferred, purchased, exchanged, donated. We simply type them. So we still use all of those vocabularies, and you can still make use of all of your local vocabularies in this, but we harmonize on transfer, title from, and we harmonize on the E number, the entity number, an acquisition or a transfer of custody. So it's those two things that allow us to do this semantic glue, semantic harmonization. We identify all the entities, we label them as such, and all of these entities have been researched from lots of different cultural heritage regions, and we're able then to search on acquisitions, and we're able to search on acquisitions that were transferred title from, and of course we can put time spans on that and people, etc. We can start building up our search around this semantic glue. I don't know whether that's helpful. So.
And Dominic, this is Neil here. I'm at American Art with the folks here, and I just wanted to extend the question a little bit. And since you're building a tool designed around an aggregation model, if the opportunity arose to bring in a data set that wasn't modeled using the CDOC ontology, maybe another ontology from another domain, have you thought about or addressed what it means to integrate that into your aggregated model?
I guess it could be, and actually in our model there are other ontologies as well, so we aren't just using CDocCRM. The mapping that we do involves some other bits and pieces. But the ontology we're using is very specifically for doing this data integration, so it's core to us in order to bring these things together. CDocCRM itself maps to most other ontologies. So you can output stuff in any other ontology from it. But the purpose of what we're doing really relies on mapping into CRM, because CRM has been specifically designed for this type of contextual data harmonization. So if you can bring in another ontology, but you might lose some of that. CRM is meant to be a harmonizing ontology. It's not meant to say you can't use other ontologies, but other ontologies that are based on vocabularies or actually have got poor generalizations of relationships and this has been built up from the bottom up in order to do this precise job. And a lot of ontologies have been built top down and don't have these properties and these elements that we need to do this work. There's been a lot of work that's gone into C.CRM to make sure that it's abstracting and generalizing across the whole of cultural heritage, and that could never have been done by a top-down committee. It's been done by a huge amount of work looking at data models across the cultural heritage world, bringing people to forth, doing workshops, making sure that we understand exactly what the meaning of people's data is, despite the fact that it isn't represented well in collection management systems, and creating this ontology. But as I say, if you go to the CRM site, we have actually got mappings to almost all the major other standards and ontologies. So once you get it into CRM, it's like you can create once, publish into anything. And of course, people will go to our Sparkle endpoint and want different things. We can provide those mappings.
Okay, I don't see any other questions appearing on the chat board. Dominic, I don't know what to say. It's been such an incredibly useful and rich presentation. We appreciate it very much. I know you in the past have pointed me to some papers and articles on these subjects, on some of the areas you've touched upon. If you feel some of these we can share with the American Art Collaborative and can send me again those links, I will be happy to do so.
Yes, I will do that, just to show you that actually it is real. This is the search system we've got in the working prototype. These are the relationships that you can form. As I say, if you go to Rembrandt, the reason I picked Rembrandt is because we've got data from the RKD in it. So if I search for Rembrandt this is a full RDF data set. We've actually got it working even quicker than this. It's faster than our collection online system. But here are RKD stuff. If you look at the bottom, the facets, there's stuff from the RKD on Rembrandt merged in with the BM. The other great thing about this ontology is that the mappings are different between the RKD and the British Museum, but we can still harmonize them and we can still represent them. It's that flexible. So no two mappings of CRM will be exactly the same. It doesn't matter. It even harmonizes with itself. So if I change this just to show created by to influenced by, you should get a completely different set of results which are based on that context. So I'll go away and do that, and you should hopefully get a completely different set of results, which are to do with influence by, not to do. And if I put about Rembrandt, you'll get pictures of Rembrandt and letters about Rembrandt and all sorts of stuff like that. Sorry, I forgot to do that while I was doing the presentation, but we tend to forget about it now because we're building a new system that got more functionality in it. Sorry, I'll leave it there then.
Thank you very much. Everyone, this is a standing applause for Dominic.
I can't see you. Thank you very much anyway. Thanks for listening to all of that. I hope it wasn't too technical, and I hope it's understandable. But if you have any questions, do email me, and I'll answer anything that you have.
Thank you.
Okay. Have a good evening, or afternoon, or morning, or whatever it is.
You too.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
That was pretty cool.